Hi, I'm Sam.
And I'm Kate.
What if the missing piece in healthcare isn't clinical, but spiritual? And what would happen if we prioritised connection and community in clinical care?
We can have a patient that comes in and we can see straight away what that person's carrying. Right, well, it doesn't matter what background the person comes from, what culture they are, ethnic background. We can see what that person's carrying, but we can't do anything about it.
And don't forget to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts and follow us on Instagram so that you can get to know our guests a little bit better.
Okay, so today we are joined by a member of our CMR community, Rachel McLeod. Rachel is a registered nurse with almost 20 years experience, and she is so loved by the communities that she supports that our clients are always asking if she can stay longer or extend her contract. In fact, one client recently said, "Rachel is everything. I wish we could keep her. Great knowledge, brilliant clinical skills, an incredible asset." Welcome, Rachel, to It Takes Heart.
Thank you. I'm very good and excited to be here.
It's wonderful to have you. Rachel, would you like to start today by giving your own acknowledgement to country?
Yes. So I am a Yugarapu woman from the Yagara Nation, right here in southeast Queensland, born in Ipswich, raised in Berezit. So I'd just love to give a big shout out to all my mob out there and to any other First Nations people who may be listening in on this podcast. Great welcome to everybody. Our country is for all of us to share and nurture together. So yeah, a big shout out to everybody and to those of non-Indigenous culture who are also sharing our country with us. We do love having you here.
Oh, that's
love
beautiful.
that.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I love that. Straight from the heart.
Yeah.
Rachel, I guess going back to the love that our clients feel for you, I'm keen to know, I don't know if you know, but why do you think our clients have loved having you so much on contract? Do you think there's something special that you bring to those contracts? What do you think is it that sets you apart?
Yeah, I don't know. I think it's a little bit, everybody has a story. And even when they come into the clinical practice and our patients and even the staff that we work with, everyone has a story, and that contributes to the holistic care that we actually give in the workplace and that our patients receive that. So having that, being an approachable person and just recognising that story behind people, it helps us to plan our care better, but to relate to people on that personal level, whether it's the staff or patients. Because if our staff aren't happy and they're struggling, we can't give the best care to our patients. And they need us to be in that space where we are happy and healthy just to be there at work. And I think if you love your work, which I do, I'm absolutely 100% for people receiving healing. I believe that healing is a major factor in fixing a lot of barriers within people individually, but which will contribute to making our society and our country better. So I'm really big on the healing, and I guess it's recognising that not just the patients need to go on that journey, but we as nurses and the staff around us all have that journey as well, and we just need to be mindful of that with each other. And I think that's a huge contribution to our work and to our patients. I think that's what people probably recognise the most.
I think we need more of that in the world generally, don't you think? In whatever sector, in any industry, in any profession, it would be lovely if we all took that view of just understanding each other a little more. Yeah,
absolutely. I believe that us individually, we are the gift to the world. So if we nurture the potential and the identity of people, sometimes people lose that in their experiences as they're growing up and getting older. Bad things happen and some people can get lost along the way. And when they reconnect to their identity, then they become a gift to the world, and that helps our society come together, I feel. When you're working at your capacity, but when you're broken and you're lost, that journey gets interrupted.
And when you work clinically, how do you bring those stories to life? Is there certain questions that you always ask patients and families or staff when you interact with them, or is it the listening?
It's the listening and just taking that time just to sit down and chat with that person. And it doesn't necessarily have to be about why they're in the ED. Like if you just sit down and talk with them, the story will come out. And I find that you can pick up a lot of additional information without having to ask for it if you just sit and chat with people. And I found over the years that that's actually the best way of getting the information that I need from them, rather than targeted questions. Because people come into the ED, they're not themselves, and they're not thinking right. There's something that's interrupting that flow. So if you just sit down and chat with them, they will bring that out themselves. So you can get a lot in 5 minutes of just sitting with somebody, rather than sitting there for half an hour asking specific questions. And I feel that's just a better way. It's just that time and that listening.
So less checking boxes and more just listening.
Yeah.
So you talked there about the ED and patients coming into an ED. Talk to us about the type of work that you do, because I believe you do locum work.
Yeah.
Said earlier that our clients often want to extend you, so an initial contract becomes a longer contract. I guess what's the work you do now? What type of nursing?
So I've worked mostly in MPS sites, which is multi-purpose services. So they incorporate a hospital with the emergency, acute, and any other things that hospital might run, through to aged care. So it's all incorporated in the one organisation. So you have to be multi-skilled to be able to work in an MPS site.
Because would you work in the ED, the acute and aged care?
Absolutely, yeah. So you have to have the skills to be able to operate all of those areas. So you have to have emergency training to come out to an MPS site. It's preferred. You can get trained on site, but you will get thrown in at the deep end straight away, and you need to be able to manage that. So there are some exceptions, but definitely your ED training is essential, because whatever comes through those doors, regardless of the nature of what the people are experiencing, you have to be able to manage it. So from mental health, your emergency trauma, MBAs, everything.
And where in Australia do we find these MPS services?
Certain size of town?
Is there certain towns?
Yeah. So MPS services are the smaller sites. So you've got like your metro, and then you're moving out into your regional rural, and that's where you'll find your MPS services.
Right.
And then from there, obviously, you've got the remote, more in the central and outback sort of areas of Australia. So, your regional, rural, small towns that don't have large teaching hospitals. They've just got small A&E type facilities, but you have to be multi-skilled to work in that setting. So you're sort of the in-between the rural and the metro, if that makes sense.
And have you ever explored going further remote and doing that real remote area nursing work?
Yeah, I have. Back when I first started nursing, I had wanted to go rural. Remote. But my children were young at the time, and so it just wasn't the right time to go. But now that my children are all grown up now, my baby will be 28 this year.
Wow.
So I have more opportunity to do that now. But I love the MPS sites. Because it gives me steady contact in all the areas and keeps all my skills in all those areas. And I like to have all my skills.
So should we maybe go back a little way then to when you first
so
started
many
nursing?
things done, like storytelling now, like all the pieces.
But let's maybe go back to when
your story.
Yeah, like tell us a little bit about maybe where you grew up, a little bit about you, and then how you found your way to nursing.
So, like I said, I was born in Ipswich, raised in Beaudesert, out on a little cattle station called the Hollow. My grandparents worked out the Hollow, and there was Mr. Tilley was in charge of it at the time. my family lived in a little a little wooden hut that had no modern facilities in it. So our water, our washing, everything was in the freshwater creeks out at the holler. Nothing modern at all. Eventually, after my father, because he was a fencing contractor, moved us to Beltana, which is in, you're moving out in towards your more remote northeast South Australia. Very desert country out there. So we had a house, which was a little bit more comfortable.
House.
Yeah. Inverted commas for those listening.
What made that house more comfortable?
It was just a little bit more insulated. Yeah, maybe an extra room or two. And the bathroom was just a bathtub. We still had to cart water. Our water taps ran on top of the ground. There was a well, but again, no modern comforts. In the mid to late 80s, we actually moved to Quorn, and that's when we lived
in South Australia.
In South Australia, Quorn, South Australia, and that was the first place where we actually lived in a comfortable, modern, civilised home.
With running water.
With running water and a toilet inside.
It's interesting. I've just come back from a few days camping with the kids, and it's one thing that they said is, we had no running water, and we had to walk over here, and we had to fill a bucket and bring it back to wash dishes or to do any of those things. And they said that. They said, can you imagine,
And that's like the first half of my life was living like that. Yeah.
Incredible.
So we had to wash in the creek, get our water. We had a big cauldron, and we would light a fire, but we would have to cart our water. So it was very, very basic living. But absolutely loved it.
I was just going to say that your eyes are like lit up when you're talking about this.
Absolutely, So I absolutely
connected.
loved growing up on country.
Yeah.
I wouldn't have traded that for anything. And I miss even living in society now. I have my own home in Quorn now, 5-bedroom house and 2 blocks of land and lots of dogs. But I would not trade what I've got now for the upbringing out on country.
Yeah.
It's
Beautiful.
It was the best part of my life.
Love that.
And did anything about your upbringing, I guess, shape you wanting to get into healthcare at all? Where did nursing stem from?
So where that came in, so we obviously raised in culture, me and my brothers and sisters. We know everything about Aboriginal culture. The only thing we know about non-Indigenous culture is we live in town now, so there are a lot more comforts, in society. But our culture is Aboriginal, and that's who we are. So when my youngest son was probably about 3 years old, he just started kindy. I was like, right, I need to do something now because he'll be in school soon. I'm also a Christian, absolutely love Jesus Christ. And with my culture and my Christianity, I wanted to heal people. So I said, Lord, if I've got to work, I need to do a job that's got to be like you. I want to heal people. And I had this dream one night, and I was walking past the basketball courts in Quorn, and this elderly white male had been going for a walk, and he fell down in front of me on the ground. And I'd rushed over in my dream, and I'd placed my hands on his chest, and my hands just lit up with light and fire over this man's chest. So when I woke up, I was like, yep, that's it. I'm going to be a nurse. I'm going to heal people.
Wow.
And that's what I did. And I haven't changed my course since then, and I absolutely love it. Yeah. So healing people, like I said, for me, that's a major factor in breaking barriers.
And so you mentioned there your smallest was 3, did you say?
At the time,
And so you've got 3 children?
I have 3 children, yes.
So then how did you go about becoming a nurse?
And you were living in Quorn, so where did you study? How did all...
So
what's in Quorn?
Yeah, so Quorn is a small farming community 40 kilometres northeast of Port Augusta, which sits right on the innermost part of the Bight. In South Australia. It's about 3 hours from Adelaide, so Quorn's about 3.5. Like I said, it's a small farming community, probably about 3,000 people, but during the holidays that can double to like 6,000-7,000 with all the tourists coming through. The hospital there is very, very busy, and the A&E department can rival sometimes the Port Augusta Hospital, which is a larger hospital 40 k's down the road. Very busy. So when you go to work there, you put your shoes on, you hit the floor running, and very rarely will you have time to stop. And there's a misconception, I feel, about the rural MPS sites, that people think they're going to go there and it's going to be nice and easy.
It's sleepy.
A bit sleepy, and they're just going to have a rest. And then that just does not happen. That's not the reality of MPS sites. Yeah, so anything can come through that door. You don't get rest.
So were you able to study at Corn, or did you have to go into Adelaide?
No, yeah. So after I'd had that dream, I decided, okay, I'm going to be a nurse. I then did my aged care traineeship. Right, so, I'm a Christian. I speak to the Lord, open doors for me, and he did. This aged care traineeship popped up through the Corn Hospital. So I applied for that and got it. And then from there, I went straight from the aged care certificate straight into university through the Whyalla campus. And I did that external because I had the children at home. My husband worked on a mine, the Beverley uranium mine at the time, so he was gone every second week on, week off. So I did my studies externally through the Whyalla University of South Australia. And Whyalla is probably about an hour's drive from Quorn, and it's like similar to Port Augusta. It's quite a large rural town. They have a huge hospital there with many units. So I did my training, went in for the workshops, and then did my studies at home.
How'd you manage that? Children. 3 children.
Yeah, it was hard.
Asking for a friend.
I'm like, as someone with 3 small children, any tips?
So while the kids were at school and kindy, that was my study time. When the kids came home, the studying went away. It was me and them. Yeah, so you just have to find that balance, what works for you. Families are different. So what worked for me may not for somebody else. But that was my balance. Yeah. While they were studying, I was studying. Yeah. When they were home, I was home. Yeah.
And then, so how old were they then, I guess, when you were graduating and getting ready to be an RN?
Yeah. So I graduated in November 2025. My oldest was 11. My daughter was 9 and my baby was 7 at the time. So I graduated November 2005, and I signed a contract with the Corn Health Services to begin in February of 2006. And then 4 days before I was due to start that contract as a brand new registered nurse, my husband died on the uranium mine. So then that set my journey into nursing back a little bit. And then I had to come into that nursing to learn how to be a nurse on top of dealing with a husband that just wasn't there anymore.
Oh my goodness.
So that was a bit of a setback. It took me a little bit harder to get my head around a lot of nursing stuff. Took a while, but once me and the children found our feet in our new way of life, then obviously it went well from there. But that first period of losing him was very hard.
I can't even imagine. No. Did you have family support around at that time? Like you talked about there, your 3 children in Corn. Who else was there with you?
So my mum and some of my siblings. So I'm the oldest of 7. And my mum and my siblings were amazing. So they would help do the school stuff and the kindy stuff with my baby while I studied. If it was on days, like the weekends, if I had to do stuff, they stepped up and they helped do all that stuff. They were absolutely amazing. And I think that's what's carried me and my children through, is that our family's just so big and everybody was on board. Yeah.
When you talk about earlier on, your patients having their story, how did that moment in your story impact the way that you approached nursing when you did get into your career then?
Yeah, so just going through that grief journey and all the emotions that you obviously go through when you lose somebody, and how it can affect your mind. When your mind takes a hit, it doesn't fully recover, never gets back to 100%, and your neural pathways are reshaping all the time. So that helped me to understand that when patients were coming in, they were not at their best capacity, functionality, and so that gave me the patience to sit with them in that moment where they weren't functioning well, and to meet them there, and then we just walk through that together. I think when people have these types of experiences, they can rely on that and remember, I was in this spot at one time and my mind wasn't working well back then. Yeah. So I understand what the patient is describing to me now because I've been there. Yeah. Yeah. And so that's that experience. If we can relate it to other people and their story, you sort of connect the dots. And then that helps that flow to happen between you and the patient.
I was just going to say, you talked before about your dream and placing your hands on the white man and having that impact. As you've gone through your career, have there been other members of your family that have been sick that you've had to nurse through those moments? And have you felt that you've had that power to do that?
Yeah, so
I don't know if that makes sense. But I was just thinking about this vision of you, and I'm like, being such a healer, being able to heal those that you love.
Yeah, so when somebody goes on a healing journey, healing can incorporate a lot of things, and it's not just a physical laying hands on somebody. There's a supernatural element that is attached to that. So Aboriginal culture is very spiritual, and we learn the supernatural power that people can possess. And also being a Christian, we learn it through our faith as well, and they're pretty much the same thing, to lay hands on somebody and be able to command sickness to leave, or to take spirits. So sometimes bad spirits come, or somebody can carry a wrong spirit, and sometimes those spirits can make the person sick. So there's a difference between a physical, natural illness that can occur and something that can be a spiritual thing. So we learn the difference between the two, and that impacts in how we would deal with it. And the laying on of hands comes from the supernatural, spiritual side of things. So my dream, I interpret it as not just to be healing people, but there's power in our beliefs and in our hands.
And have you had the opportunity in your work over the years to practice in this way? Because I imagine that perhaps there are some services where they're like, no, tick the boxes, check the list,
absolutely.
Go through the motions, as opposed to this beautiful, it's a very frustrating thing when you're in an organisation and there's policies and there's structure there, and the spiritual component is not always recognised. Even though we talk about holistic care and spirituality in that, it's not. The reality is that we don't embrace it enough. And the spiritual component is a major part of people's health and their mental health, because there are influences. It's a bit like electricity, how electricity makes things work. It's there, you can't see it, but there's a force, there's energy there. And that's how the spiritual healing happens as well. It's that spiritual, that energy and force that you can't always see, but it's there, so you use it. If that makes sense. Yeah. And so I guess going back to your question, do your family all look to you to be...
Absolutely. I'm the doctor too.
I was just going to say,
So have you got any examples you can share with us of
so
where you've
many.
had to...
Every time something goes wrong with somebody, no matter how big or small it is, they're on the phone straight away. So it's a very regular thing, and if they've got questions, they will ring me up first, and then I will say, okay, this is what I think it is. And then they can go to the hospital or the doctor then, and they know what they're going to ask for, and they know what they need to check. For example, my youngest son was bitten by a spider not long ago on his right foot. rang me up straight away because he had this incredible pain. And the pain just got worse over the next few days, and it was so intense that he was vomiting. He was sweating. The sweat was just running off of him. That's how intense the pain was. And I was like, okay, I had a couple of days off of work. I said, I'm coming home. I need to check this. I think you've been bitten by a spider maybe, because the symptoms, you sort of recognise. And got there, took one look at his foot. That's cellulitis. You've probably been bitten by a spider. Let's go. So he ended up on the drip, but he never would have rang the hospital because there's a lot of mistrust as well.
Let's talk about that.
Yeah, a lot of mistrust, a lot of misinterpretation and language barrier. So when we obviously raised in Aboriginal culture, even for me, sometimes there's a barrier. Even though I speak perfect English, I still struggle sometimes with how a non-Indigenous person is thinking. And then they will treat me in the hospital, and I only know the difference because I am a registered nurse and I'm good at what I do, right? So I know to pull them up and say, hey, I think this here, let's try this, But my family members and other people who are non-clinical, they don't know that, and they wouldn't recognise the difference, and they would just trust that person. And then, of course, if that person, they're not understanding and that communication barrier. And like I said, even though I speak perfect English, it still happens to me a lot.
Can you give an example of maybe what you mean there in misinterpretation? Because, not everybody has a nurse, a mum to call up and who can fly home and help, right? So if we're thinking about the wider community, what are some examples of where it's just not marrying up?
Because they might not realise.
And they know it feels wrong but don't know why.
Yeah. So a non-Indigenous person, if, for example, like you might be wanting to know information from your client about a specific thing, say sexual health, for example, right? So you want to know if, this patient has any sexual partners recently that might explain some of the symptoms that they have. But how they actually ask that person who they've been with can mean many different things for us. So what might seem straightforward to a non-Indigenous person, and how you would frame that question, you could ask it to me and I could say, yeah, that's right, I have. But you might be looking for something specific. So you've not specifically come out and said, have you been with in the last couple of days? Well, yeah, I have been with somebody, but you're not asking me, have I actually been intimate with that person? So it's how you sort of frame it. And I'm just trying to be a little bit delicate.
Of course.
So how a question might be framed won't mean the same thing to us.
Right.
So most of us know if you've been with somebody, we're referring to intimacy, personal intimacy. But to us, it could be, I've been with that person. I was out with them
yesterday.
It's a simple thing, but it can cause a lot of misinterpretation and misunderstanding. If that makes sense.
Absolutely.
So then you can take that and apply that to lots of different things in nursing. It doesn't matter what it is. You can apply that to anything. So it's
the way that a non-Indigenous nurse treats an Indigenous client, how can they give a better experience? If you were to sit down with a non-Indigenous nurse who's come out to Corn and go, I'm going to give you 3 tips for success, what would they be?
To make sure that they remember there's cultural protocols in our culture for men and women, and there are things you can and cannot ask, and you need to know the appropriate people to bring in to stand in that gap. The second thing is don't take things at face value, because we still practice traditional law in our culture, and what would in society would be called self-harming, we actually Those are actual practices. So we may be scarred, or there may be something about our feature that you might look at and think, oh, that person's not taking care of that particular thing, you know, like dentistry, for example. But they're actually signs of that this person has actually been through our cultural laws and initiations. So there's not a mental health issue there. There's not self-harming there. These are our practices. So don't immediately look at somebody and think, oh, I know what's going on here. You don't, unless you know what our culture practices. So it's just that don't be quick to judge. Just sit back and let's just listen for a minute and let's get a story around this. And again, it's important to have the right person there if it's a man and we're female, and vice versa. The third thing is, our people aren't dumb. Don't talk to them like they're babies. Okay? They have ears. They can hear what you're saying. They may understand what you're saying, but there's a little bit of a language barrier, and the issue is communication, not that they're dumb. So don't dumb the person down. See that a lot, even with signage in some of the hospitals. It's very basic childish stuff, and it's honestly insulting for us. Very insulting. You know, I get angry because my people aren't dumb. Right, there's just a language barrier, and we come from different cultures. And if you're not prepared to sit in and learn about our culture, how can you understand what's going on here? You know, it's like two different worlds, and we've collided, and we still haven't figured out how to navigate that properly.
And if someone's locuming out in like a location like Corn or somewhere else, are there clinicians like yourself that you give them those tips, but then you can take that further and go, here are our cultural practices, here are the things that I need to teach you to set you up for success? Or is it more about that healthcare worker needing to seek that out?
So I will help somebody to navigate through those things, and a lot of Aboriginal practitioners are absolutely happy to help people navigate through that. But you can feel the energy off of people too when somebody doesn't want to learn, and if we pick that energy up for you, we're not going to force it on you. So it's a two-way street, and it's a relationship, you know, between our cultures. If we want something to improve, we need to address what the gaps are, and that means everyone needs to come to that party. Right, so if you want to learn from me, I'm happy to do that. I would love to teach you what you can and can't do with my culture, but you have to be able to receive that. So, and that's another thing with people. Everyone has skills and experiences and different knowledges in this country, you know, and we have to be able to receive. That gift of receiving is really important, I feel, because if you put the walls up and you refuse to be teachable, you can't do anything with that type of attitude. You know, you have to be able to receive and then give us something back. So our culture is reciprocal. You know, it's like doing a trade. If you come visit my country, we'll give you a gift, you know, and then we'll trade something, you know, and it means something. It means we've made a connection. So you give us something, we'll give you something, and vice versa. But both of us, we have to be able to give and receive to do that. And that includes learning in a clinical setting about our culture. But not just our culture. If you can receive that for Aboriginal culture and Torres Strait Islander people, you can receive that to other cultures as well, because there are so many. Yeah.
Do you think when we go back to the higher education and, you know, the nursing degrees, are there gaps you see in that training? Even when you talk about spirituality, I mean, I was an occupational therapist and, you know, we talked about holistic care, but I'm sitting thinking, I don't recall us even thinking about spirituality of a patient. I felt like, and I was in palliative care at the end, it seems to come in.
Absolutely.
We'd have a conversation then, but there was all these other conversations. I was in the ED as well, and it was just ticking the questions.
Yeah. So like I said, like in my faith and in my culture, Aboriginal culture is literally built on spiritual law. The foundations of our laws in the physical world are based on consequences for breaking spiritual laws, if that makes sense. So everything we do down here, you'll reap what you sow. And our laws were formed around that. So we had a very stringent, strict practices and discipline in our culture, because when you broke laws and protocols, it interferes in the spirit world, and then consequences don't just come on you, but spirits can transfer. If they can come from me, through me, into my children and down our generational lines. And it's like where that spirit of intergenerational trauma comes from, if that sort of makes sense.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah, so it moves like a spirit, and it goes, because it's working through the person, and they've suffered all these things, and it changes how their worldview and how they relate to the world. And then those children grow up knowing that behaviour, right? And then that's what they learn as normal. So, 2 or 3 generations down the line, it's culture. It becomes another culture, if that makes sense. Yeah. So there's all of that stuff that comes into it.
And what about becoming a nurse? It sounds absolutely vital to have Indigenous representation working within healthcare. Like, how important is that to you, and do you see that improving?
How do we encourage more representation in healthcare?
Yeah, I think one of the barriers is there's a like we said, that lack of addressing the spiritual aspect. So if our culture is built on that, but we walk into that clinical space that doesn't acknowledge it or recognise it, and we're not allowed to practice it there, only in certain circumstances. So they might bring in a traditional healer if the person's requested it, but it's specifically requested. So that having that spirituality, we can have a patient that comes in and we can see straight away what that person's carrying, right? It doesn't matter what background the person comes from, what culture they are, ethnic background. We can see what that person's carrying, but we can't do anything about it because we're working in a system that doesn't embrace that. And you just have to treat the clinical symptoms and
so I guess, do you say that
let them go? It's very frustrating.
Does that then not attract the right people?
Sorry?
Does that then not attract the people that we need to come into medical?
Yeah. So, definitely a barrier, because while we can see spiritually what might be going on with somebody and they've got a wrong spirit that's coming, we call them wrong spirit. So you've got a good spirit and you've got wrong spirit. So when that wrong spirit comes in and sits on a person, it can influence the normal physical functioning and health of a person. But we can't do anything about it in the modern clinical setting that we work in. Outside of our job, we can do that and we can talk freely about it, but when you come into a white man's system, as in the Australian health system, it's not a thing.
So how did you overcome that? Because you're clearly a very spiritual person and you've had so much on country growing up, and to then go into that system. But you've done this a very long time, and you seem to have found a beautiful balance. But initially, how was that?
Yeah, so when I first came into nursing, obviously I had to learn the difference between the two and how to do my practice around those things, because the one doesn't welcome the other. And even though I'm taught about holistic health and spirituality, the definition of what spirituality is in that holistic setting is very broad and encompasses so much stuff. It's very broad and it's very non-specific, like you can't pinpoint something. So in our culture, identifying if somebody is carrying something, so we know how to read it in people. Even through my faith, you get taught how to read it in people. Same thing. But there's nothing you can do about it. So, for example, I had a lady who came in at an MPS service that I was working at, and I could see straight away what she was carrying, but I couldn't do anything about it because our clinical practice in that hospital setting doesn't allow us to go into that type of healing. So we would not. So what happened is that we admitted this patient, treated her with the drugs, spend a little bit one-on-one time with her to talk and let her express her emotions and stuff. That's the standard that we do with people if we care about what they're going through. But I couldn't do anything about what I knew was the spiritual issue, because it's, you know, it's kind of taboo in the nursing setting.
So what's the answer there?
There is no answer unless that patient, it has to happen outside of work, and the patient has to want you to go through that journey with you. And that's part of the healing journey that we need to go on, because the spiritual has to be dealt with along with the physical and the mental health as well. So
it's really like
it's a big isolate it.
No, it's like such a systemic change though in the training. Like it's even just back to that training as a nurse, for example, like even just the coursework to change, and the way, like you were saying, working in a white man's system until we go back to the training and the way that we work, that's going to be very challenging to influence. But it sounds like one of the ways that you've worked through that challenge though is from coming back to the beginning, where you're going back to what's someone's story. And I imagine that there's an element through those conversations where some of that spiritual healing or opportunities, that I bet you there's some magic that you weave into some of those conversations.
Absolutely. And one of the big things about that type of approach is when your patient becomes comfortable with you and they feel that they can trust you to be able to open up and tell you their story, truth telling comes into it. And truth telling, being honest about what's happened to you, what it made you feel, you know, the anger, the fear, truth telling about all that stuff releases a lot of spiritual energy, can set people free, especially if they embrace that and continue on that healing journey. That's how you'll bring somebody out of it. And obviously there's more to how you would do that in depth. But that's just like in a nutshell.
Yes.
But truth telling is a major factor. That's what sets people free.
And so I guess we've talked about some of the challenges that you face working within a system. But I guess if we were going to talk to people and really try and inspire people to take this path, because we need more people like you choosing healthcare, what are the really wonderful things that you love about being a nurse? What are some of the really things you just love?
Yeah. So I love that I have a lot of capabilities and I can do a lot of stuff, you know, like the cannulation and the taking blood and all the trauma stuff, you know. So we have lots of skills and we have to maintain those skills. And that's why I love the NPS sites, because I get to keep everything that I've learned over my 20 years of nursing, I get to keep all of them and practice them all the time. Versus if I went into a city where they would have somebody that specifically would take blood, somebody would specifically do the ECGs, but in NPS sites you have to do all of that. And I love that we get to, I think that makes us just special, a special breed of nurses, your NPS and your remote nursing. I feel that really sets us apart. And just being in a position of leadership, because then you can take that, especially when you get the students through and they come to these small rural towns and there's nothing there, you know, not a lot to do. You can go for a walk or maybe go for a hike and climb a mountain, but we don't have things like the city has. But you can teach them all these other skills in the nursing setting, and you know that they're going to leave that placement knowing a lot more than some of the city nurses who work in specific units will know. And I think that's amazing that you can help somebody upskill in that way.
And I'm sure that, you know, we go back to that needing to change, like the systemic changes at the education level. But I actually had written to ask, like, those graduates coming out or even candidates coming out on placement, to have that experience, you're able to sprinkle some of that training and shape the way that they think. And
and it's really when they, you know, when you get an emergency coming in, you know, like there's been a car accident, you've got multiple people coming in, and then you've got to time manage, prioritize and be able to lead you know. So then they get an open view into what each of those different components of that nursing is like in that setting where somebody's life is literally in your hands. And that opens doors, I feel, for when, you know, they go on with their further studies to the different areas of nursing that they may want to get into, because there's so much. But yeah, the graduates that come through, they get to, in these smaller and rural remote sites, will get touched with all of that stuff that they won't necessarily get in the city. And I feel sometimes students will come out, or even like other agency nurses will come out and they think it's just a little sleepy hospital and they're going to be bored stupid, you know, and then they walk out the door straight away. You know, I've worked in a site where another agency from a different agency, not this one, had come in and left like 2 or 3 hours into the shift. This is not for me, because I feel there's a misconception around, you know, these small country towns and what they're actually going to be exposed to. And they haven't given themselves enough time there to realise, no, you're going to get slammed. You know, it might be this is your orientation day today, so you're not counted in the numbers, but tomorrow you're on the floor, and what comes through that door, you have to be able to handle it. So I feel that they don't give it that chance to allow themselves to be exposed to what these small sites actually offer them. But I wouldn't trade them out for anything. I love the small MPS sites.
I'm sure, though, as much as it's, you know, not like a sleepy town, I'm sure that there's still a little bit more time in those interactions with your clients to be able to ask more of those questions and have those deeper conversations and hear their story. And
with the patients?
Yeah, with the patients,
not always. And again, that's a misconception, because you could have, if your ward's full and you've still got A&E coming in, because that happens quite regularly, you don't have a lot of one-on-one time, and you really have to prioritise how you're going to manage that. And you try and divide yourself up between your A&E and the ones that are already inpatients on the wards. So it can be very challenging, but you can do it if you have those skills to be able to manage your time properly and prioritise. It's essential in that type of setting.
So much exposure, like for someone to, we hear it all the time, don't we? Metro nurses going out slightly more rural and just upskilling instantly. Because what you're thrown into, and you're not just waiting for the next person next to you to do it.
Because sometimes you may not have a doctor on site. You're the doctor too. And we have this SAVES, which is a virtual link up between the city. So 7 to 7 at night for priority 3, 4 or 5. If we get people coming in, you know, the triage 3, 4 or 5, we can link up through the SAVE service to connect with an on-call doctor overnight, which will be situated in Adelaide, and we can get things dealt with. But if it's a triage 1 or 2 and you don't have a doctor there, you are required to manage that 1 or 2 until an on-call doctor from somewhere else can get there, or the retrieval team comes from the city. So you literally are the doctor and the nurse, and that person is alive based on your skills in that moment.
Sounds like we need really confident but curious people who are willing to
want
learn.
To learn. And so I meant about having that time to just sit there when they come, just allow themselves to be exposed to what's there, because they'll find that it wasn't what they thought. It's not just a little sleepy little town, they're going to be bored stupid. No, that very rarely happens.
Very busy, very busy.
Rachel, if we reflect on your 20 years almost as a nurse, is there a story or a moment, and if you think about your connection to country, to spirituality, to all of the patients that you've seen, is there a moment in your career that's really sat with you, that really lights you up and keeps you going?
There's a little bit of that in all the patients and all my interactions. There's nothing specific, but the best parts that I feel is when other First Nations patients come in and we understand the spiritual connection. We can get a lot more done because that person, and me obviously being First Nations, we connect straight away and we know what's the problem here.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And that helps us to actually deal with that a lot better, and we're working on the same level. Whereas if that connection isn't made, you're working on different levels, and that can make it hard sometimes. But I think there's just a touch of magic in every single patient and every interaction. But my favourite would be making that spiritual connection with First Nations people, because we are able, we recognise what's really going on here, and we can address that without it interfering in the policies and procedures, because we have the same attitude towards why this is happening. And we can sit down and say, yeah, this is what needs to happen, this is what's happening, this is how we're going to fix it, and then we can connect them then to the people out in the community, who can then actually take that. So same way how we would network, somebody needs allied health or needs a referral to a specialist, the same way we would network that way. With the First Nations people, we can do the cultural networking as well behind the scenes and just say, look, just go see this person. Whereas we can't do that with other people, which is sad, because I feel like they're missing out on a lot of healing.
I think that every community you go to, obviously very lucky to have you. Bringing so much more than just your clinical skills, clearly, to every community that you're in. So CMR are going to make a donation with this episode when we publish it. Where can we be raising some awareness for? What charity today can we talk about?
Nourish Street Incorporated.
Yes, here in Brisbane.
Yes, yes. I had to do a little bit of research because I hadn't heard of them before, and so I was looking at that last night and what they do. So working with people in need, homelessness, with the meals and stuff. But they're trying to branch out to get the nurses incorporated and have a clinical side to their organisation, which I'm actually stoked about. Because going back to people's stories, those people who are in need, there was a cause, and once that cause is there and people are no longer able to control that in their lives, everything else gets out of control. So everything really is connected to everything, and I feel that this organisation is trying to connect those dots, and obviously they're for everybody. So
Rachel, thank you so much for sharing your story with us today.
It's been so wonderful.
I could talk forever, but
I could probably listen forever.
Yeah.
It's you talked then about every patient has a little bit of magic in them.
Yeah.
But I tell you what, there's a whole lot of magic in you. You are just a really, really special person, and every community, every patient that gets a moment with you is so lucky. So thank you.
Yes, you're welcome.
Thank you for your story.
I've loved it. Yeah. And like I said before, I believe that each one of us is a gift to the world, and we just have to help people get on that journey to re-identify with who they are, so they can share their gift with the world, because we all need somebody else's gift at some point in our life.
Love that.
I believe. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. You're welcome.
We care for the land and sea.
We acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land of which we meet, who for centuries have shared ancient methods of healing and cared for their communities. We pay our respects to elders past and present.